Good evening. I'm Kathleen Miklas with the Friends of the Simsbury Public Library, and I'd like to welcome all of you here tonight. Before I introduce our author, I just want to point out that at your seats there are brochures about becoming a friend of the Simsbury Public Library, and I encourage you guys to strongly consider joining. Your support helps us have wonderful authors like Georgia tonight. Georgia Hunter was born in Massachusetts and raised in Providence, Rhode Island. She received her BA in psychology from the University of Virginia and settled on a career in marketing and branding. Her personal essays and photos have been featured in places like the New York Times Book Review, and she is also a freelance copywriter in the world of adventure travel. But after learning at 15 years old that she came from a family of Holocaust survivors, and after attending a family reunion 6 years later, a spark was lit, and Georgia would spend the next 10 years researching this part of her ancestry. It led to her 2017 celebrated debut novel, We Were the Lucky Ones, which has been published in over 20 languages, has sold over 1 million copies, not bad for a first book, and was adapted for TV by Hulu as a highly acclaimed limited series in 2024. Tonight, Georgia will tell us about her newest historical novel, One Good Thing, a stirring story of sacrifice and bravery set in Holocaust-era Italy. It was just released earlier this month, and we have plenty of copies for sale, which Georgia will be more than happy to autograph after her talk. Georgia lives here in Connecticut with her husband and her 2 sons. Please join me in welcoming Georgia Hunter.
Thank you so much. Wow. Can you guys hear me okay? Okay, amazing. What an amazing crowd. Thank you so much for being here tonight. And Kathleen, thank you for the lovely intro. Thanks for hosting me, and a special thanks to my mom who's here tonight with me. I'm sorry to call you out, but you need a wave. You're going to see her often tonight because she was very much a part of both books, actually. But I'm so excited to talk to you about this new book. It's been a minute since I've had a new one out. The first one was 2017. And there are a lot of sort of parallels in my research and in my findings, and in a lot of ways that this book is entirely different from We Were the Lucky Ones. So excited to talk you through a little bit about the process and the inspiration. As Kathleen mentioned, my first book was inspired by a discovery that I came from a family of Holocaust survivors. So it began as an ancestry project. I had no idea growing up that I was a quarter Jewish. That my grandfather was, one of 5 Polish Jews to survive the Holocaust. So I set off on this journey that took the better part of a decade, during which I unearthed and recorded their story, the family's story. Obviously, it was a very moving and deeply personal experience for me. And so when the book came out and my publicist called to say, and my editor called to say, all right, well done, but what's next? I was truly at a loss because I had gone into the first project as the granddaughter and the family historian, and I hadn't yet really started to think about myself as an author yet. So I really had to spend some time deciding where I wanted to allot my headspace and my heart space. Because I knew if I were lucky enough to write another book that would get published, I'd probably spend a lot of time with it, not only in the research and the writing, but with events like this, talking to people about it. And my head and my heart, after many months of thinking about it, kept bringing me back to World War II and to Europe and to the untold stories of the Holocaust. I landed in Italy for a couple of reasons. One, despite the fact that it's home to one of the oldest Jewish communities in Europe, I felt like its Holocaust history was a little fuzzy, a little less known than, for example, what was happening in Poland, where my family was from, and in Eastern Europe. And I thought it could be really interesting to try to bring that history to life through the eyes of a very ordinary young woman who's living it real time and telling her story firsthand. So that was one sort of thought process. And the other is personal, and that comes back to my mom, and that's the fact that she and my dad actually met in Rome in the 70s, and I'm going to embarrass you again with some photos from the era. They're both American, living there for very different reasons. My mom had a very cool clothing shop where she was selling these amazing jackets that she forgot to keep for her unborn daughter. No grudges. And my dad was acting and directing and writing. Have you guys heard of spaghetti westerns, like the Italian version of the western? So he was in many, many, many of those. So I grew up hearing stories about what life was like. And together they lived there for a combined 17 years. So it was a very big part of their beginning. And I grew up hearing stories about the life, the culture, the food, the people, the places. In the summer times, they hopped down the coast to a little town called Sperlonga, where my mom decided, even though she'd never done anything like it before, she would open a restaurant. She said she went and bought The Joy of Cooking and then gave it her best shot. So they'd spend the summers at this beautiful little restaurant on the sea. You can see my dad painting the sign called Savannah there, La Savannah, which is, he was born in Savannah, Georgia, so kind of nod to his heritage as well. And I took many trips to Italy as a little kid. My parents were kind enough to bring me along on their travels. Here I am at the Trevi Fountain, I think at age 3, and again, probably in high school with one of our dear friends on a mother-daughter trip. And it's a place, even though I have a bucket list that's a mile long, and I want to see every place there is in the world, to see Italy is that country that I keep returning to over and over and over again. And so it became an obvious choice. I'm going to write a new book, and it's going to be set in Italy. So the first thing I did was set off on a whole bunch of research. And we were the lucky ones that was a little different. The first thing I did was start interviewing relatives to try to understand how the family survived. For this, I really went to the historical piece of it. So what was happening in Italy at the time? And I was actually quite surprised and a bit confused at times, because the history, it turns out, is very complex in Italy. It is not as cut and dry as, again, things that were happening in Eastern Europe. There was a very slow build. So if you were Jewish and living in Italy, it was not one day to the next, like in Poland when the war began, the early September, and a week later, your country was occupied and your life was essentially at stake. In Italy, there were some laws called the racial laws, these manifesti la razza, that Mussolini instilled way back in 1938. And they were similar to the Nuremberg laws in Germany. And little by little, they sort of chipped away at the rights of Italy's Jews. He said there's a pure, in the manifest, he declared, there's a pure Italian race and the Jews do not belong to it. And because of that, every few months and years that followed, their rights were taken away. They were not allowed. First, the kids were kicked out of schools, and Jewish teachers were kicked out of teaching positions. They couldn't have jobs in medicine or in banking or in journalism. They couldn't join the army. They couldn't hire employees or marry non-Jews. So the world was slowly kind of closing in around this population. Meanwhile, the Jews of Italy countrywide were forced to register their names and addresses in a census. And on their paperwork, there was a red stamp, di razza ebraica. My mom was coaching me on this earlier, meaning of the Hebrew race. So every Jew was mandated to register in the census, their passports marked, and also amidst the climate, the press was controlled by Mussolini. So as you can imagine, there was a growing sense of polarization and anti-Semitism in the headlines. So here are just a few of them. Enough with the Jews. The Jews are national pests. The Jews are our number one enemy. But again, if you were Jewish and living in Italy, it was like a very slow burn, slow build. And from everything I've read and understand, the Jews were completely assimilated into the culture. And it was sort of like the laws came out of nowhere. Like, what does this even mean for us? And how is this going to change our lives? And okay, well, maybe we'll lose our jobs, but we'll just get another job. And I can see that things are happening across borders, but we're in Italy and this is our home, and we're equal parts Italian and Jewish, and what could possibly happen, especially under the eye of the Pope. All of that changed, of course, in 1943 when Germany invaded northern Italy and the country was divided. So basically the center and the north of Italy is occupied by Axis German forces. The trajectory of Mussolini's path is also very twisted and confusing. And he was out of power for a while and then put back in power and instilled up in the north under a republic called the Salo. So then at this point in 1943, if you were living in the center and the north of Italy, and if you were Jewish, you were in trouble. And sadly, this is where the majority of Italy's Jewish population lived. I was also really surprised to find that amid Italy, amidst the country, there were many camps where Jews were sent, pulled out of their homes, and from there deported to Auschwitz to the east, to concentration camps. Again, it was nothing I never learned about this piece of the Italian Holocaust history. So I thought a lot about how do I bring this story to life through my main characters. I have two main characters. Well, one really, and her name is Lily, and she's a young university student who you meet at the start in 1941, and she's best friends with a slightly older girl who's Greek named Esti. They're quite different in personality. Lily is kind of a lot like me, kind of a little quieter and introspective and a rule follower, very, very pragmatic and doesn't want to bend the rules. Esti, on the other hand, has a very big personality, very sort of courageous and bold and defiant, sometimes to a fault. So I have the story opening in Ferrara, which is a little town up in the north. I don't know if you can see there, sort of north of Bologna, where they're in university. And the story opens as their world is starting to close in around them. And I thought, how can I tell the story of Italy's Holocaust through this friendship, through Lily's eyes and through her friendship with Esti? And I should mention that Esti has a little baby boy, Theo, who you meet in the very first chapter. So that's not giving too much away. So I'll walk you through a few of the places that I decided Lily and Esti would travel in their journey in One Good Thing. And these were all places and events and people inspired by real historic places and events and people I discovered in my research. So in the town of Ferrara, this is sort of a back then picture of what it once looked like. I loved it because it was home to this beautiful university. It's also a medieval village that was surrounded by these very big walls that were actually wide enough to walk on and bike on. Is a picture of what it looks like today. It's a beautiful little town. And I like that probably most people haven't heard of it. Has anybody read The Garden of the Finzi Contini? Yeah, so I read about it in that book. It's a beautiful book, again, about this time period. And I was really drawn to it. I'm standing in front of one of the synagogue doors here. And we rented bikes. Oh, and my mom came with me on my Italy travels for all of my research. So we spent a week together, and this was our first stop because I had kind of mapped out Lily's route at this point. So we spent a week in our little rented Fiat and drove around the country, following in Lily's imagined footsteps, and rode bikes and stood up on the walls. And had dinner one night at Al Brindisi, which is apparently the oldest trattoria in all of Italy. I don't know if that's true, but it was built in 1453, so possibly. And I knew I would set a scene for Esti and Lily at this very same restaurant. Another one of their stops, once they realize it's not so safe to stay put, Lily and Esti start to move. And their first stop is a little tiny village called Nonantola. And Nonantola is one of those places where it's so small that everybody knows everybody. And I love how similar it looks, right? Like the pictures from back then and from today, which happened often in Italy. Everything's just so historic and so well preserved. So then and now what it looks like. And one of the reasons, the main reason I was drawn to this town is because I read about a villa there called the Villa Emma. And during the German occupation, this villa, before the German occupation, this villa was home to over 70 young orphaned Jewish children, most from Eastern Europe, whose parents had either been sent away or had been killed. There was a group called De La Sem, and they had volunteered to try to help protect these children. And again, it was a very small town, so people knew about them. It was no secret that they were there. But it became a very big problem when word got out that the Germans' invasion was imminent and that they would be in this town like the next day. And according to record, this group of volunteers decided that they would move the children because, again, everybody knew that they were Jewish and it wasn't a secret, and their lives were at stake if the Germans were to discover them. So they decided to move them in the middle of the night, and they pulled them out of the villa, and some hid in an abbey, and others they knocked on doors until every single child was hidden, and every single door that they knocked on opened up, and one of the townspeople let them in. And I thought that was so moving that these locals took these kids in, and I won't give away too much more than that, but I knew that this villa and these children, this is a picture of all the children, would show up in Lily and Este's story. This is the abbey where many of them were hidden. Another stop on their journey was Florence. Now, Florence was interesting to me for many reasons. There was an archbishop there named Dalla Costa, real person, who was involved in trying to help the Jews. So the church is interesting. We could talk the whole night about the role of the church and the Pope, and there were many, many involved who helped, and he was a key player, Dalla Costa, in trying to be a part of this network of people invested in helping to protect, either hide or try to find IDs for Italy's Jews. Because Florence was one of those cities on the map where there were roundups and there were Jews being sent off to concentration camps in the east. And there were raids, constant raids, including one at this beautiful little monastery across the river on Piazza del Carmine, where Lily and Este find themselves for a stint. And there are two times where in Lily's story where she decides she's going to take a walk between this convent and the Archbishop's palace, which is right next to the Duomo. So my mom and I walked her route and decided like which roads she would take. And it was really cool walking literally in her footsteps and noting all the sensory details, right? Like what did the stones feel like and look like underfoot? What were the sounds we were hearing? What were the smells? And to me, those are the details that really bring a story to life, and why I love historical fiction, because you can write a scene as if, it's happening right now, and it feels as if it's happening right now. So we made this walk a couple times. Lily does it once in the daylight and once in the evening. Took a lot of time to admire the beauty of Florence, and this was the Ponte Vecchio, which was obviously one of the beautiful landmarks of the city. And one thing I learned is that once the Germans left Florence, they bombed the entire city, and actually every single bridge except the Ponte Vecchio, which apparently Hitler deemed as too beautiful to bomb, to destroy. So, but the rest of the city was largely decimated. So this would have been Lily's view before the war, before the German occupation, and then her view after. Another place that I visited and absolutely fell in love with was Assisi. Has anyone been to Assisi? Oh, so many of you. Isn't it? It's unbelievably beautiful. Put it on your list if you haven't been. Assisi, I was drawn to for many reasons as well. Mostly because I read that it was also home to a small village, but home to over 300 hidden Jews. And I thought, well, how did they manage, and where did they go, and what happened to this group of Jews who were hiding here? And I discovered that there was a gentleman named Luigi Brizzi, who was a local shopkeeper who sold like religious tchotchkes at the front of his shop. And in the back, there was an old refurbished printing press. And on that printing press, he was secretly printing false IDs. It was IDs that he would then falsify for these Jews in hiding, or he would ship to Florence to the archbishop there to distribute to Florence, or then on to Rome. He was so secretive about it, he apparently didn't even tell his son what he was doing. But here's an example. This is there's now a museum in Assisi where you can see the old press. You can see his shop where it used to be, an example of what the IDs looked like and the stamps. And there was so much involved, which I'll let you read about in the book, in making these IDs. And the other character that I read about in Assisi was a gentleman named Gino Bartoli. He was Italy's golden boy at the time, a famous cyclist who had won all the things, the Tour de France and all the big races in Italy. And it turned out that Gino was secretly shuttling some of these IDs that Luigi was making in the frame of his bicycle across Italy. And when I heard that, I was like, okay, he's definitely going to make the story. It's this handsome guy biking around town with, thinking no one would ever stop him, and they didn't. And his story, if I have time, I'll read a little passage of an interaction that Lily has with Gino. Gino worked closely with a monk in Assisi named Father Nicacci, real person. And he was a part of this monastery that was beautiful. It was like down the hill from the town. You had to kind of exit the city walls and walk down this hill, and there were just olive groves and patchworks of farmland. And I took note of all of that. And I remember as I was writing some of these scenes and throughout the book, because Italy is one of the more beautiful countries there is, I decided I would allow Lily some moments to just look up and admire the scenery and listen to the church bells that are constantly ringing in Assisi, and sort of take a moment and appreciate the beauty that is around her. So this monastery is called Monastery of San Damiano. Father Nicacci was the head monk there, and so he was part of this network of underground helpers, and we got to explore inside and around. And there are two scenes set at this very table where Lily and Father Nicacci have a conversation beneath the oil painting of Christ and trying to figure out where she should go and what she should do next. Rome, of course, had a cameo, being the place that my parents met. I also spent my semester abroad there. I forgot to mention that. So I've spent a lot of time in Rome, and it's one of my favorite cities. And when Lily arrives there, it's not the sentiment once the Allies begin kind of pushing up from the south of Italy is that, the war will be over soon. The Allies are here now. And this is a map that shows you all the lines of defense there are, but for the German lines of defense, and just how slowly this war actually moved. I think everyone thought it would be over much faster than it actually was. And so this puts Lily in a position to try to decide, do I stay? Do I try to cross this line of defense and reach the Allies? Do I stay in hiding? Rome was technically a free city, but it was swarming with Nazi and fascist black shirts. So it was not a safe place to be as a Jew. So in Rome, I had a lot of fun actually pulling all the places that I love the most about the city into Lily's story. So I have her living in a little apartment off of Piazza Farnese, which is, again, one of the sort of tucked away ones that not many people visit, next to Campo dei Fiori and Piazza Navona, the bigger ones. And she admires these fountains, which during the war were dried up, but she still admires them. And she goes out of her way when she goes to the post office to walk down Via Giulia, which is my favorite street in Rome, just gorgeous with these bridges and these beautiful palazzos where you can kind of peek into the courtyards. And she has a conversation right next to one of these courtyards. Of course, we were lucky enough to see the Pope. I'm so glad he's doing a little bit better now. You can kind of see him there, but there is a scene where Lily is in this piazza and listening to the Pope speak as well. She goes to Borghese Gardens, which is one of my favorite places in Rome as well. And then here she is at the Gianicolo. Did I say that right? It's one of the 7 hills of Rome. And my mom and I had a beautiful moment there where we actually brought some of my dad's ashes. My dad has passed, and we spread some of his ashes there. So it felt like he was there with us. And there is a romance in Lily's story too, who is very much inspired by my father. So he was very much in my heart as I wrote, and being the place where, my parents' love first blossomed. It was beautiful to imagine him there with us. Bologna is the place I decided that would be home for Lily. It's where she grows up. Her father, Massimo, has a place there. I love Bologna. I love it for the size. I love the porticos. Everywhere you go, there are these beautiful arched doorways and like covered hallways that you can walk through. The food is unbelievable. The little door there is to a synagogue, one of the synagogues. This city was also badly bombed as the Germans retreated. They tried to destroy everything in their wake. So this might have been Lily's view growing up, and maybe one of her visits when she went home during university. And post war, this is what the city looked like. It's unbelievable if you think about it. So many of my sites were exactly as they looked back in the pictures, except of course, these types of photographs of the decimation and of the ruins. Bologna is also home to a beautiful Jewish cemetery. It's nothing fancy, but Lily's mother has passed, and so she goes to visit her mother's headstone a couple of times in the story, and we spent some good time in the Jewish cemetery. I was inspired by this headstone. Her last name is Pasili, so that's Lily's last name, and again, just kind of taking notes of like what kind of trees are growing, and are there birds, and what do I hear, and what's underfoot, and who are the names and what does it look like and feel like? So this was we had a nice kind of quiet afternoon wandering around the cemetery in Bologna. A quick nod to Rhodes, which is where Lily's best friend Esti is from. And my decision to bring Rhodes into the story. Greece was, I wanted to be able to tell a little bit of the Greek Holocaust history in the book as well. But when I was pregnant with my first, so it was probably 14 years ago now, I took a trip to the Greek Isles and wound up wandering around the back streets of little tiny Rhodes, the island of Rhodes, and we stumbled across a synagogue. And it's one of the oldest synagogues in Greece, if not the oldest. And there was a gentleman in there and he let us in, and it was with my husband and my father-in-law, and we walked around admiring this gorgeous little synagogue. This is what it looks like today. He started telling me a little bit about the history, and I was just kind of in awe. And sadly, Greece's history statistically is horrific. It's second only to Poland's, like the losses that they suffered as a country. But I knew that Rhodes would somehow show up in Esti's story. So she's from Rhodes. And then later, when I was doing my research, I met a woman named Stella Levy who grew up on Rhodes, and she was giving a presentation, and she talked about being this little girl and running around in her cork-soled sandals and jumping off the rocks and jumping into the water and being a little bit of a wild child. And so Stella was very much an inspiration too in my development of Esti's character. And then there were also some characters who I stumbled across who I just thought, you are so cool. Like these women, these Jewish women who joined up with the partisans and the resistance. And they would, smuggle weapons across borders or negotiate with the Nazis or, hold false IDs or throw smoke bombs. They were doing unbelievable things under the noses of the German occupation and of the Nazis, of the black shirts and the fascists. And I just thought, wow, I never knew this group of women existed. So there's a friend named Matilda that Lily meets, who is very much inspired by a real world Matilda partisan. And I'll just leave it at that. I don't want to give anything else away. And I'll wrap by just saying, I think it was part of my not my concern, but it was a little bit intimidating to go into the second book, having written the first that was so deeply inspired by my family story, and that I didn't veer like a second away from the truth, right? I spent so long trying to uncover the truth of how my family survived, and then I stuck to it. So what you read is the reality is very authentic. With one good thing, I knew I wanted to allow myself the creative license. I wanted to root it in history and real people and real places and tell the history of Italy's Holocaust as truthfully as possible. But my main characters were all made up, and where they went was up to me. So that was equal parts freeing and terrifying. But what I realized as I wrote was that I really relied on real people in my life to bring those characters to life. So there's the little baby Theo, and Lily ends up having to try to care for Theo during the war and protect him when Esti can't. And in the first book, there was only one little child, and her name was Felicia. It was a little girl, and I thought, well, I have two little boys at home, so I'm going to make my little guy a boy. And I drew so much from my two boys, Wyatt and Ransom, and the experience of raising them, and for Lily and Esti, trying to create some sense of normalcy for this child amidst the darkness and the chaos and the horrors that are unfolding around him, and sort of, again, allowing those moments of levity was a real joy, and kind of brought me levity too as I wrote. Actually, this is a beach where Lily and Esti in Rimini, where they stop and have a little girls' weekend. here we are. This is my husband and Wyatt, who was 4 when I was doing my research for We Were the Lucky Ones, and we made a stop in Bari at the train station, and there are some train station scenes in the new book as well. And this is my little guy. And I knew I wanted to have some sort of like talisman for Theo. So he carries around this little white, we call it a lovey. He calls it his lamb in Italian. And it's like the thing that never left my son's side for like 3 years of his life. So very much inspired by my kids. And it was like that throughout though. So the friendship that Lily and Esty share was completely inspired or drawn from the friendship that I have with my best girlfriends, and sort of that like, I would do anything for you, you would do anything for me type bond. Lily is very much me and probably a lot of my mom, because I am a lot of my mom. And Esty was really inspired by Stella, but also by Helena, if anybody read We Were the Lucky Ones, who was the youngest of the Court's siblings, but sort of the biggest and boldest in personality, and certainly the most defiant. There's the love between Lily and her father, which is really inspired by my own admiration of my father. And then there's a romance with an American soldier who is very much inspired also by my father and a little bit by my husband, who are two of the most kind and loving Southern gentlemen that I know. I surprised myself a little bit, I guess, in the end, by really drawing from my own personal friends and family members as I brought these characters to life, which felt comforting to me, because that's all I knew from the first time. Even though for the first book, I was really drawing from stories about people that were passed down, right? So my family I'm 3rd generation, so I was often interviewing 2nd generation. So for this was even closer to me, because I was able to think about my own friends and my own children, my own husband, my own parents. So I'll read a little passage, and then I really can't wait to hear what kind of questions you guys have. But do I have time? Yeah? Okay, good. So I mentioned Gino Bartoli, and Lily has bumped into him once at that monastery in Assisi and kind of recognizes him, but kind of doesn't, and is like, if that's Gino, what is he doing here? Like, what is happening? This scene takes place in March of 1944. So Lily has left Assisi, and she's on foot, and she's trying to make her way south towards what she hopes is safety. And they've been walking for a while, and they decide, it's just the two of them, they decide that they're going to stop and take a little break. And she's constantly on edge, because not only is she worried about running into a German soldier who comes down the street on a motorcycle, but there are allies that fly overhead and are bombing Nazi-occupied territory to cut off supply routes and things like that. So she's in constant danger. But there's a moment where she's sitting, and she takes a second to, again, admire the scenery, and she kind of gets lost in thought about her beautiful surroundings. And Theo kind of pokes her in the ribs with his elbow. They're sitting having a little tiny snack, and he says, "Someone's coming." He jabs her with an elbow, and Lily's smile vanishes. "What? Where?" Theo points. "There." Sure enough, a man approaching on a bicycle. "Careless," Lily chides, straightening. Had she been paying better attention, they might have slipped behind the juniper, but it's too late for that now. She stands, tense a hand over her eyes as the figure nears. He moves at an alarmingly fast pace. Lily scans the road behind him to see if anyone is chasing him, but he's alone. He slows as he nears. "It's him," Theo cries, "the man from before in the snow." And sure enough, Lily realizes, it is. The cyclist brakes to a stop on the side of the road and waves. For as fast as he'd been riding, Lily notices, he's barely broken a sweat. "Buongiorno," he says. "Hello," Lily says. "Hello," Theo says. "I thought I recognized you," the cyclist tells Lily. "That purple coat. We met in Assisi, right? At the monastery?" "We did." "In the snow," Theo says. "That's right. It was a cold ride home." He turns to Lily. "You're a friend of Father Nicacci's, yes?" "I am, just recently so. You as well?" "Certo, although we go way back." "I'm Gino," the cyclist says. So it's true. "I'm Lily, and this is my son, Theo. It's an honor to meet you, Gino. My father is a big fan." Well, that makes my day, Gino says, grinning. I like your bike, Theo says. Thank you, young man. How old are you? Theo waggles his 3 middle fingers. 3, so old. My son, Andrea, is 2. You remind me of him. This is my racing bike. Would you like to have a closer look? Theo glances up at Lily and she nods. He approaches the bike, and Lily listens in as Gino points out its various parts: the saddle, the pump holder, the toe straps, brakes, stem, hubs, the double left axle caps. It's so dirty, Theo observes. Theo, Lily scolds. Even though he's right, the bike's frame is caked in mud. Gino laughs. Normally, it's much cleaner. We had a run-in a few weeks ago with a bomber. Theo's eyes widen. You did? Well, the bike did. Lucky for me, I wasn't riding at the time. Where were you? I was in Perugia, having a coffee. I'd leaned her up against the outside wall of the cafe, and the reflection of her frame in the sun must have caught the pilot's attention. And then what happened? Theo asks. Well, Gino says, glancing at Lily, he missed the bike, thankfully, but the cafe, let's just say he left his mark. In broad daylight? Lily asks, glancing overhead. No one was hurt, thankfully. After that, I figured I'd better make sure she wasn't so shiny. He pats the frame of his bike, then looks to Lily. They fly over often, the Allies. I'm aware, Lily says. And it goes on. But I love that moment. I love creating that moment. And I think that's also a fun example of the creative license I took in kind of blending history, this real life character who I knew was riding this route to deliver these IDs, and then my made up character, Lily, in the moment. But I'll wrap with just, I think one of the things that also struck me in the writing of this book was the theme that sort of bubbled up naturally as I wrote and as the characters came to life, which happened actually, and we were the lucky ones as well. It's not something I tried to force into it, but that theme was love. And I think, for my family story, that was the love between siblings and parents and the hope that they would survive and they would find each other again. And for Lily, I think there's many kinds of love. There's deep-rooted love with her father, her late mother, the best friend kind of love, love for this little boy who she becomes this surrogate mother to. And I think, for me and for Lily, that theme and that feeling of love really, again, despite the world closing in around her, the horrors unfolding around her, was what brought her hope and inspiration amidst all the uncertainty. She's having to make decision after decision of where to go, of what to do, of who to trust, of whose door to knock on. But I think what I constantly fell back on was that theme of love. And I think it fueled Lily and it fueled me as well as I was putting words to the page. So I had a really beautiful experience writing this book. I hope if you pick it up that you enjoy it. And I would love to hear your questions if you have any. Thank you. Thank you. Yes.
May I ask you something about We Were the Lucky Ones?
Of course, yes.
I picked this up just after publication, and I enjoyed it immensely.
Thank you.
I can't tell you how much and how realistic it was. And when I learned that they had made a series out of it, I was very anxious to see what they had done with the story. How do you feel they told the story on Hulu?
Yeah, I was just talking about this earlier. I am so proud of the story, of the series. I was very lucky in that a dear friend of mine optioned it and directed it and produced it. And he asked me from the very beginning, would you like to be involved? And I said, yes, please, every step of the way. So I was involved in everything from the writer's room, where I helped the writers craft the episodes. At each episode, there are 8. To casting, to approving all the sets, to the scripts, all of it on set. Many times we shot in Bucharest. I flew over to Bucharest 4 or 5 times. We shot in Spain. I got to bring my family over from all over the world. So people often ask me that question, and well, what were you surprised about? Nothing, because I was involved every step of the way. And the cast it's all Jewish cast, which I'm really proud of. A third Israeli, a third British, third American. They are the most talented group of humans I've ever seen, and we're like family now. Like I was literally just texting with Hadass, who plays Mila, who got an award for her role as Mila. Eva, who plays Bella, reads One Good Thing, so I fell in love with her so deeply, and actually Lily is very much inspired by her as well. So like our worlds are now forever connected, and this group, everybody though, not just the cast, like everybody who touched the project really put so much care into it. I'm so proud of it.
I thought it was one of the finest adaptations of a novel.
Oh, you watched it?
I've
Good.
ever-
I was like,
It's available. We binge watched it.
oh, good. Oh, I'm glad you agree. I'm glad you agree.
I read the book to our book club.
Oh,
It's just-
thank you.
It was very, very impressive.
Thank you. I'm so happy to hear that.
The fact that it was true and that
Yeah.
everybody survived was absolutely one of the most heartwarming stories
Yeah.
that I have read out of World War II. And I've read a lot of World War II literature.
Yeah.
It was just very, very heartwarming.
Thank you.
Your grandfather?
Yeah. My mom's father. Yeah. Mhm. Anybody else? And I can repeat the question if. Yes.
I heard Pam Jenoff speak.
Oh, yeah.
Not too long ago, and she also writes about the Holocaust, historical fiction
Mhm.
about the Holocaust. And she said that in every book that she writes, she includes something about the Holocaust.
Mm.
Is that the path you're planning to go down, or are you planning to expand?
Yeah, it's a good question. I can't. The question is, will I continue to explore the theme of the Holocaust in my work, in my future books? I certainly will continue to write. I don't know for certain if I will stick with the Holocaust. I do know for certain that I want to talk as much about this story and about We Were the Lucky Ones with audiences, and especially with younger audiences at schools. So I'm putting together a curriculum right now, kind of based on We Were the Lucky Ones. And I think because we have the adaptation, I have all the research, I have the primary source material, it's a true story. I discovered it at 15. High school is just like the perfect place to continue to tell the stories and to remember. And the statistics are very scary right now, how few people know about it. And then, of course, combined with the rise in anti-Semitism. So it feels like the time is now to continue to tell these stories. So I'm not certain the next one will be Holocaust themed. I do know that I will continue to talk about the works that I've done thus far, and hopefully in more and more schools in my future. Yeah.
I know that in many of the high schools, especially as freshmen or sophomores, they do study the Holocaust.
Great.
So
Yeah.
it must be an opportune time to expose the kids to that.
Yeah, and to try to tell a story that feels relatable. I think with Lily's story is like that too. Like she's so ordinary. It could be any one of us. And with her life just turned upside down, and she's faced suddenly with the most extraordinary of circumstances, until you kind of put yourself in the shoes of somebody who's experiencing it firsthand, it's hard to relate. And when you can't relate, you can't really empathize. So I'm hoping it brings a lot of that. So empathy and understanding and all that. Yes, thank you.
More of a comment. First of all, thanks for covering this topic.
Yeah.
And doing it in such a way, you tell the history, but you do it in a very good way.
Thank you.
As you say. But one of the things that was disturbing to me when I was reading the book, the very first thing was the scene where they're in the movie theater, right? And people are dropping the signs, and that's happening in a much the same way now. So for me, that's an education for what's happening at this point in time.
Yeah, I think most of you heard that, but it's scary how many parallels there are within stories like this one and within my family's story with what's happening today. And that was pulled from that event really happened. If you read the book, there's a scene in a movie theater where this film is showing, and people are dropping racist, anti-Semitic notes from the balcony, and Lily and her father have to sort of sit through it and endure it, and kind of leave thinking this too shall pass. But yeah. Yes. Question was, yeah, and the image behind it too. how did I come up with the jacket, the title, and the image? So I have no part in the imagery. That is a Penguin Random House decision. They, of course, showed it to me, and I actually loved it right away. I loved the sentiment of it, and I think the woman looks a lot like my real life grandmother, my mom's mom, Caroline. So I loved the image. The title is kind of fun story, actually, because early days when I was just sorting out the plot and Lily's story, I was sitting with my husband in our living room once the boys had gone to bed, and he was like, "Tell me about it. Like, where are you in this process?" And I'm like, "Well, I know I have a main character, and I want her to be called Lily, and it's really a story of friendship and survival. But she's got this best friend, Esty, and I want her to be forced into taking care of Esty's son. And I want her to have to kind of go on the run. I want it to feel propulsive. I want it to have a lot of movement. And once she goes on the run, I know that she's going to be surrounded by uncertainty and loss. She's going to lose contact with people. She's going to feel very much on her own. And it'll be a coming of age in that sense. Like, she's going to have to decide, does she have the strength to do this? But there'll be a time when she looks around and she has lost contact with her father, with her best friend, and the world's closing in around her. But she does have Theo, and I knew I wanted to be called Theo, and Theo's like the one good thing in her life. And I kept talking, and he stopped me, and he's like, "One good thing, that's a good title." I said, "You know what, you're right. So thank you, Robert." And I like that we were the lucky ones, and one good thing, it's kind of got a nice little tie in. Yes.
The Holocaust it's such a heavy topic.
Yeah.
To continue writing about it, does it weigh on you? Do you have feelings about all of this?
Yeah, do I have feelings about continuing to write about the Holocaust, and does that weigh on me is the question. And absolutely, I mean, your question, that is a huge part of my decision-making process about whether I can, this book, the first one took 10 years, and then I worked on it, the adaptation, for another 3 years. So it was so much a part of my life. This was 5 years. It would be a very challenging thing to take it on again and to spend another 3 to 5 years living in that world. That said, I think I would 100% do it if I'm inspired by the right story or come across something. If the spark is there, I know I could do it. It's really hard. It's really heavy, and it's really relevant, scarily relevant today, but in a way that makes it just like gives me even more of a drive or motivation to continue to tell the stories. But I definitely have to take breaks. It's when you're writing, and especially the harder scenes, there's only so much you can you kind of have to time travel, right? You have to go back in time and put yourself in the shoes of your characters and imagine what it felt like, and all the senses and all the things, and what did it feel like in her heart, in your heart? Like, how would you respond? And that's a lot. So I found that one thing I learned is, if anybody's a writer, maybe you'll agree, like when I'm writing and in the creative process, like actually putting words to the page, not the research or the editing, I learned that I had to buffer in some time before I closed my computer and went home and was surrounded by the chaos of kids climbing on me, because it was too jarring of a transition to go from back in time in that world. Even if there were lighter moments, of course, you're just you're living in that heavy world. So often now I take a walk or meditate or stretch or do something before I, go home to my beautiful family life that I'm so lucky to have at home. So I think there are ways to manage the heaviness, but it took some time to kind of learn that for me. Anybody else have any questions? Yes. Yeah, the question is about the writing process and how did it go? Between the research and how much revisions, how much editing did I do? So it's interesting. This was a big difference between the two books, because again, with We Were the Lucky Ones, I wasn't about to change much about it. Maybe I would work on my character development. I polished and polished and polished, but I wasn't going to change the plot or the stories of survival. They were what they were, and my editors were I dare you to tell me to change because I'm not, there's no veering from the truth, right? So I really could have probably called that one nonfiction almost. But this one was of my own making mostly, right? All my characters, my main characters at least. So I had an early draft that was the beginning, I would say, was about 30 chapters long, like before you kind of got to the action. And now if you pick up the book, that was 30 or 10 chapters. So my first round of revisions was very significant. And it was feedback from my editor. There were characters that I didn't need in there. There was that slow build that I talked about was like very much prevalent in the pacing of the novel in the early stages. So I kind of realized, okay, I can talk about some of that backstory and I can speed up the pacing and I can speed up the timeline a little bit and then live in that world for a little bit longer and live with her on the move a little bit longer. So it was really good feedback. And then another round of feedback I got, there were, I think one of the things I've learned is you're always it's really hard to get feedback, first of all, on your writing. Like you get what's called notes. And my agent's always like, look at them and then put them away for a day and then come back and look at them again. There's always good stuff. They always start with the good stuff, but then there's the feedback that's sometimes hard to hear. And one thing I've learned is that if my editors, who are wonderful, amazing editors, if something bumped them or bothered them, there's a reason for it. They might say, oh, you need to cut out some characters, or oh, you need to change this to that. But rather than take that kind of verbatim, that feedback, what I take now is okay, you were bumped out of the story for some reason. Here's your idea of how I can fix that, but what feels right to me? Like, how would I like to fix this? What feels like the right direction for me to go? And as I grow as a writer, and now I actually can think of myself as an author, I feel more confident sticking to my gut on how to address the issue. So that's been a real learning curve for me, but also very empowering in a way. So I was able to, for the second round of revisions, take a lot of feedback and say, okay, I hear you, but I'm going to try this, and then got it to a place where everybody was happy. Yay. Thank God. Yes. Mm. The question is, how much pressure do I feel in terms of deadlines and how does that affect me? This was interesting because I started it pre-COVID and then COVID hit, and we couldn't, my husband and I couldn't both work at the same time. So we would kind of alternate. So that put a big pause in my deadline, and everybody understood. There was no question about that on the publishing side. And then We Were the Lucky Ones got optioned. So I was working full time on that. So when I was working on the series, I was not working on the book in tandem unless I was home. And if I was home, even though the series was still going on and being shot, and I could kind of watch some of what they call the Q-take of what was happening over in Romania, I was putting my attention. And that was very challenging because it was two very different projects. But as a writer, deadlines are like a double-edged sword. Like they're stressful, but you have to have a deadline in order to do any work because otherwise it's I remember when We Were the Lucky Ones was picked up, my agent picked it up and said, okay, we have 1 year until we're going to send it out, or 6 months or whatever, until we're going to send it out to editors. And then the editor picked it up and the publishing house picked it up and said, okay, I need to see revisions in another form. I can't remember exactly but it just gives you time. It gives you a frame, and it's really, for me, it's very, very helpful. Also stressful, and I'm pretty type A and organized, so I try to get my work done in advance. But inevitably, the last 2 weeks are me at my desk until 2 a.m. Or I have friends in Westport, and I borrowed their house for 3 days at the end of my last edit because I was like, I just need to go somewhere that's not my house and not my office, and just write and edit or just read through one more time before I feel good about sending this last version out. And so they graciously lent me their house. It's always a cram for me at the very end because and I honestly, if I picked it up today, I would probably change a few words, so it's never ending. But it's certainly a mix of both. It's nice to have a deadline, but it also makes it a little stressful for sure. Anybody else? And you're welcome to if you think of a question and you want to come by and ask me, I'll be in the back corner signing books for whoever would like one. But thank you so much. Okay.
For over 40 years, SCM
has been the voice of our town,
bringing us together through local programming,
education,
and live broadcasts.
SEM isn't just about television.
It's about empowering our community,
ensuring our voices are heard during government meetings,
and celebrating milestones
like our high school graduations.
But today, SEM faces a challenge.
Our funding structure is based on television subscriptions.
And it's no secret, people have been cutting the cord.
With a shift to internet-only subscriptions,
SEM receives less revenue,
even though all our programming is freely available online.
We need your support.
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 Your donation can make a difference.
It will ensure that SCM remains open,
continues to educate our youth,
and keeps our community informed.
Thanks to SCM, I've been honing my creative skills, helping me work towards my college degree.
SCM is crucial for keeping our community connected.
SCM isn't just here to broadcast local events. They're actually preserving Simsbury's history.
Join us in preserving Simsbury's voice.
Simsbury's voice.
Together we can ensure that SCM continues to thrive
for generations to come.
Visit our website
or scan the QR code on your screen to make your donation.
Every contribution
counts.
Thank you for supporting Simsbury Community Media,
where your town,
your schools,
and your government
come together.